Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Kaffeepause, our regular check-in with a Berlin-based journalist to talk about the stories shaping the headlines. Today, we're joined by Felix Serrao. He has served as the head of the Berlin office since July 2017 and editor-in-chief of the Neue Zürcher Zeitung in Germany since 2021. Hello, Felix. Herzlich willkommen.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege.
I'm delighted that you can join us today. And as regular listeners know, I generally like to start the Kaffeepause by asking about the political mood in Germany. But before I do that, today I think I have to start by asking you something else. Can you share with us what the reaction in Germany has been to the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump in Pennsylvania on Saturday? This has been dominating the news here in the US. And from what I've been following, it's been dominating the German press as well. I think it would be really interesting for us to hear from you how people are responding to this news.
Yes, thank you. My view is that it's generally a shock across the political spectrum. If you look at today's newspapers, you will see this iconic image of Donald Trump with the American flag in the background, pumping his fist. And it is generally viewed as something that will that, of course, on the first hand, shows how heated the political atmosphere in the US is, how radicalized many people are. This is no news, really. This is, of course, a problem that we've seen for a number of years. Strategically, I think all the commentators that I've read so far agree that this will strengthen Donald Trump's campaign. It is widely regarded as a show of force, and of course of his absolute, his political instinct, his PR genius, to in a life-threatening situation like that, to within seconds realize that this is also an opportunity to create images that will really shape the political debate for the weeks to come. And all the colleagues I've spoken with, the pieces I've read in other media agree that it will be very hard to beat him now that this has happened and with the way that he has reacted to it.
It's interesting, though, putting this in the context of transatlantic affairs, because it seems as if political violence has been on the uptick in Europe as well. I only need to remind our viewers and listeners about the relatively recent attempted assassination of the Slovakian Prime Minister, Robert Fico. Of course, and this has come up in previous Kaffeepause discussions, there have been attacks against German, but also French politicians and campaign workers in the run-up to the EU election. And most recently, there was the foiled assassination plot against the head of Rheinmetall, the German arms manufacturer. In Germany, is one sort of thinking a little bit more about this issue of political violence, both in the public, but also in the political elite?
I think I would differentiate between the alleged plot against Mr. Pappberger, the CEO of Rheinmetall, and sort of this radicalized political violence by radicalized individuals that are really hard to foresee. That Russia, on the one hand, has been engaging in a hybrid war against the West. This is no news, you know. I mean, they've assassinated someone, you know, in broad daylight in Berlin. You know, they're engaging, you know, in all sorts of destabilization tactics. This is, you know, both the intelligence services in Germany and politicians from across the spectrum have warned about this for many years. So that they're going after the CEO of one of the leading arms companies in the country is really no surprise. Although it's alarming, but it's no surprise. Now, if you look at someone like the alleged shooter from the Trump assassination, the attempted assassination, from what I've heard is, you know, he was a registered Republican voter, but there was no so far, there's no knowledge about him being a radicalized individual. You know, he's not engaged in any hate speech online or so. So this is what I think is most worrisome, that, you know, these people, these lone wolves, you know, there's no traces online. You know, how do you protect yourselves against these people?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen that in Germany, you know, not just a very high profile case like with Mr. Pappberger, but, you know, with you know, the attempt to attack the synagogue in Halle. That was luckily because the big door, you know, he couldn't open it. Otherwise, the bloodshed would have been much heavier. But yeah, we've seen that. I mean, we don't have as many. That's a whole different hot topic issue, I know, but we don't have as many weapons in private hands in Germany. Otherwise, I think we would probably also see more shootings, but that's probably a different debate.
That is a different discussion, but it ties into a question that a viewer just submitted. Let me read the question as it is, but then let me perhaps parse it a little bit. The viewer writes, there have been a lot more frequent and successful political assassinations in Germany over the years than in the US. So why pick on the US as a divided society? I think the viewer was, you know, touching on what you had said earlier about how divided US society is. But I see sort of two questions here, right? One has to do with the use of political assassinations, but the other has to do with social divisions. And I guess, you know, as the editor-in-chief in Berlin, your focus is more on the US, more on Germany than on the US. But I'd be interested in hearing how people are interpreting and observing what's going on here in the United States.
So I mean, the German public, there was just recently the so-called Deutschland-Trend by ARD, the leading public television broadcaster, and Infratest DIMAP, the pollster. And there was a general worry about the state of democracy in the Western world. And one country Germans worry about quite a lot is France, because, you know, the radical left and the radical right are, you know, together sort of now make up the majority of the popular vote. And in the US, both there's people are both in that survey at least been very skeptical of Mr. Biden's capability to hold the office, and they're very critical of Mr. Trump as well, who's seen sort of as a loose cannon, you know, who may you know, pull out American military support from Ukraine and sort of neglect, you know, Europe altogether. So it's really you know, in the Greek mythology, one could say Scylla and Charybdis, you know, the two monsters, and how do you get your ship, you know, between the two safely.
How do you navigate these two challenges? Well, particularly since you mentioned some of the recent polls and concerns over the state of democracy, let me come back to what's often my opening question at the Café Pause, which has to do with the mood in Berlin, the mood in Germany. Of course, we're speaking kind of in the middle of summer, but what is the political mood like in light of all of the domestic and foreign policy challenges that are on the agenda?
Very bleak, to be quite frank. I mean, if this hadn't happened, all eyes would now be on the upcoming elections in Eastern Germany in September. In three eastern states, Saxony, Thuringia, and Brandenburg, where in all the polls the AfD is number one. And for example, if the Christian Democrats want to continue running the government, or at least return to the government anywhere, they will have to bite in the sour apple and somehow form a coalition with Mrs. Wagenknecht and her newly formed party, which, as you will know, has a very, very a confrontational view on the West, on NATO, and on the United States. So for the Christian Democratic Party, who has been, always, a party of Atlanticists, how they are going to sell this to their voters is a mystery to me. So that's one thing that worries many, at least in the established political field, the outcome of these elections. AfD, as I said, is the number one in all the polls, and Mrs. Wagenknecht and her new party are number three, or a strong three almost anywhere, almost everywhere. And the national government is as unpopular as I think no other coalition government has ever been before. I just spoke with a Landrat, which is sort of in the German political system, it's below the prime minister of a state, but locally they're quite powerful, from Eastern Germany. And he told me that in the European election, the so-called Ampel coalition, so the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberal Party together only came to a popular vote of 10%. So wow. In large parts of Eastern Germany, the national government is really, they're extremely unpopular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's stick with Eastern Germany and what's going on for a little bit, and then come back to the federal government and the traffic light coalition. You've written a fair amount in recent weeks about the AfD, about the Alternative für Deutschland. And the fact that they're gaining traction. We've seen that in some of the polls, how well they're doing. In your mind, how do you explain the popularity of this party in the East?
Well, it's not only an Eastern phenomenon. You will see them sort of gaining popularity in the West as well, even in industrial centers such as Baden-Württemberg and the Southwest. However, they're not nearly as strong. I would say it's a bundle of reasons. So we have a multitude of crises on our hand, not exclusively to Germany, but I think to a larger degree in Germany than in other countries in Europe. That is foremost the migration crisis. So, we've had the peak in 2015 and 16, but it's been a crisis that has never really been resolved. So just last year, we've had some 330,000 asylum seekers newly arriving in Germany. The biggest groups are from Syria and Afghanistan, when people from these countries say asylum in Germany, they're never denied entry. At the end of last year, we had an interview with Friedrich Merz, and he reminded us that the numbers by now are so large that the Afghans in Germany make up 1% of the global Afghan population. And the number of Syrians, 1 million, are 3.5% of all Syrians. So by now these numbers will have gone up even further. I mentioned that Landrat I spoke with from Eastern Germany. He told me that, of course, we still have room in Eastern Germany. So we've empty gym halls and empty, apartment houses. We can still room people who come to Germany as migrants. But what we do not have anymore anywhere in Germany are people who will teach, language classes, who will teach integration courses. We don't have enough places in schools and kindergartens and so forth. So the integration that I think even until today, a majority of Germans would be willing to make possible and help with, is just not possible because there's not the infrastructure, there's not the personnel. So this is in all the polls that you're reading. It's inflation has been a worry for many years, but now that the inflation rate has gone down, it's not the number one worry of Germans anymore. But migration has always been in the top three, and now it's the number one again. So and people, the general view is that what the Ampel coalition is doing is not nearly enough. Just now, the Minister of the Interior from the Social Democratic Party says with the end of the European Football Championship, the border controls, she will stop them. We don't need these anymore. And so people read these news and they say, well, you clearly haven't understood how severe the crisis is.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I think, is there are more reasons. The support for military support for Ukraine is something that is seen very, very critical in Eastern Germany, much more so than in the West. And AfD, so the radical right and the radical left, they both agree in this, which helps them in the East. But I think if you have to pick one reason, it's the ongoing migration crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, you've also written extensively about the issue of migration, and that seems to be one of the top subjects. I guess over the weekend, Markus Söder, the minister-president in Bavaria, made some remarks about keeping the border controls in place, and that it was a mistake to get rid of those after the football championship. I think that there's been some discussion about keeping the border controls in place, at least through the Olympics, to try to show some support for France. So this is obviously going to be a story that's worth following a little bit more in the weeks ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yes. However, I would even, if the government were to decide to keep the border controls going, I think it would just be, not the main lever. Because like I said, if you come, say, from Syria or Afghanistan and you cross the border to Germany and the police, they catch you and you just say, well, I'm from Afghanistan, and then you just say the word asylum, they won't push you back across the border. So, and then the whole process starts. And the problem is that, even the ones whose asylum applications are later denied, just a very, very small fraction of these people are then sent back to their home countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming back to the elections in Eastern Germany, I think that as you said, there's a lot of concern that the Alternative for Germany is polling very high, could end up being the strongest party. There seems to be ongoing discussions about whether the Christian Democrats would work with the AfD or not. They've said they won't, but do you think that that's something that will hold? And one of the concerns that I have is that if the other parties create sort of an artificial coalition to block the AfD from governing, there's very little else that they will have in common, and this will make it difficult for this 3 or 4 party coalition to really govern effectively. How do you see things playing out in the 3 Eastern German states that face elections in September?
I don't see any statewide coalition between, say, the CDU and the AfD anywhere, not this year, because all the leadership of the CDU in all those states have been so clear that this is nothing they would ever do. Mario Vogt in Thüringen has been very, very outspoken about that. He had a television debate with Björn Höcke.
Mm-hmm.
Where he basically, more or less insulted him for an entire hour. So that is just, I think, unthinkable for the moment. But I think that if they get the strongest results in these states, then the debate within the party, at the basis of the party, and communal politics will reignite.
Mm-hmm.
Because there, many of the basis of the AfD and the basis of CDU, these the AfD people were formerly in the CDU, so these people know each other, they're neighbors, they speak with each other, they agree on many things. So at the base of the party, if you speak to people, you will very often in the East find very little understanding for this firewall that they've erected in the party headquarters in Berlin. It will stand in this election, but I think it will crumble afterwards.
Mm-hmm. So one of our viewers is curious. You were talking before about the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, and one of our viewers is curious whether it's a good sign that the CDU, the Christian Democrats, and the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht might be willing to work together in Thuringia.
So I'm, I work for a liberal paper. This is, classical liberal, not the American understanding of liberal. So I would say I'm a classical liberal. I work for a classical liberal paper, and we're not very fond of the idea of erecting these firewalls between legal parties. Switzerland, for example, has made very good. As a strong political stability, and all parties that go over a certain threshold have to work together, and that's going from the Greens to the SVP. So why should this not be done in Germany? I mean, it shows a certain disrespect from the sovereign, from the people, if a party that gets some 30, 31, 32% of the popular vote is just treated as an outcast who no one wants to speak with. So I would argue, and I have argued in editorials, to do integrate these parties, the sooner the better. Because of course they're in many ways they have a radical notions, they have impossible people that play a role in the party, but it's still a young party. If you look at the Greens in the 1980s, that was a wild party. You couldn't compare them with the party that you have today. So have some trust in the democratic process, in electing people to office, and the way that once you've, it's very easy to be critical of everyone else when you're always at the sideline, and then talking to the microphone and always explain how the established parties can't do this, can't do that. No, put one of these people into office, give them political responsibility. They won't be able to undo, democratic institutions. I think the checks and balances and institutional control is very strong in Germany, but civilize them by integrating them. And this goes for the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht as well. If they reach a certain strength in numbers, you have to find a way to integrate them. And I mean, in Germany, if you look at the national polls, there is a center-right majority in German politics. But by the firewall that has been erected by the CDU against the AfD, the CDU, which is a center-right party, is always forced to have a left-leaning partner. Will alienate their core voters for the foreseeable future, and will strengthen AfD even further.
So that's a great segue to talk about national politics a little bit more. I mean, you mentioned earlier that Scholz and his Ampelkoalition, his traffic light coalition, are incredibly unpopular in Germany, and certainly this is something that we see playing out in polls. Things have been a little bit more quiet in the last couple of weeks. Prior to that, we definitely heard a little bit more about some of the infighting between the various factions in the party. One of the big issues, of course, has been drafting the budget for 2025, and it seems as if there is finally some agreement on that. I think later this week, the budget is supposed to be presented and is supposed to be adopted. Can you talk a little bit about sort of your take in Berlin on the Stimmung, the mood within the coalition right now?
Well, first of all, I think the budget will be passed. the leading personnel from all three parties has no interest in having early elections now. No one wants to be the one who is then, presented by everyone else as politically irresponsible. Surely not the Liberal Party, Christian Lindner, who's always fought against his image as being somewhat of a lightweight, because he, when there was the opportunity in 2017 to form a so-called Jamaica coalition with the Greens and the Christian Democrats, he in the last minute said no.
Mhm.
Better not to govern than to govern in the wrong fashion. So he will not be the one, and he would be the one who would have to do that, because the Liberal Party, market liberals, they have had to, how do you say, is that an English saying, he had to eat the most frogs in this
Right.
coalition. And from what I hear from within this party, they won't do that. There's a certain sentiment in the party from the basis, they would love that, but the leadership of the party won't do it. So this government will hold until 2025 in the fall. It won't be repeated. That I would bet a very fine bottle of wine over.
But what do you think happens next? We talked a little bit about Markus Söder earlier. You mentioned Friedrich Merz. It looks as if Friedrich Merz will be the Kanzlerkandidat, the candidate of the CDU-CSU.
Yes.
But in polls, it appears as if Söder is more popular. So what's happening within or among the Christian Democrats?
So I always hear that Söder is sort of a popular in the polls. But I'm not convinced that he would be popular once people realize, this is not just a very entertaining politician that we get to view from the outside of Bavaria, but he would actually, run the country. I think there would be a shift in public opinion. And these decisions, at least in a party like the CDU, are not solely done by polls. There's always these two parties have a past, and everyone in the CDU remembers how Markus Söder torpedoed the last national election and talked about then the leading candidate Armin Laschet.
Mhm.
I would argue that these attacks that were obvious attacks and not just sublime by any means, they were one of the main factors, because the union, the so-called union between CSU and CDU appeared in the public eye as really not being a union at all. Mr. Laschet was seen as not being a strong political leader, and so at the time the CDU let it happen. They let Markus Söder attack because many in the party were not convinced themselves that Laschet was the right guy. But I think Merz is made from a different aus anderem Holz gemacht. So I don't think he would allow that to happen. And I don't really see a challenger. I mean, Hendrik Wüst, this very young, very talented politician from North Rhine-Westphalia. He's in office, unlike Mr. Merz, but he's never won an election.
Yeah.
So he still has to prove himself. He's too young.
And he has time, right? I mean, he has time. I think that Friedrich Merz would have to really trip in order for Hendrik Wüst to try to move into that slot. And until that happens, I think that Hendrik Wüst can bide his time and see what happens with Merz and as things progress. We've talked a little bit about the Greens, but not very much about them. And of course, Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister, made news about 5 days ago in a CNN interview with Christiane Amanpour, where she basically took herself out of the race to be chancellor, saying that was not something that she was planning to do this time around. Paving the way, presumably, for Robert Habeck to be the Kanzlerkandidat of the Greens. But some observers have said that this is a little bit like a poison chalice that she's handing on, because the likelihood of the Greens to do that well in the election in 2025 is really very limited. What are your thoughts on what's going on in the Green Party and this decision by Baerbock?
First of all, it shows, her having said that to Ms. Amanpour, that you always, even as a German, have to follow the American media when it comes to German politicians, because at least if, the foreign minister, they always make their really important remarks abroad. Just like when she called Xi a dictator, she did that with at Fox News.
Yeah.
But that's just as a side note. I think she knew that, from the way that her campaign was managed and how she, it had so many flaws, from her book to some public statements of hers, that she knew she wouldn't really have another chance. Everybody would have dug up, the mistakes from the previous run next year and reminded her of it. So I think she knew that it was his time now, and of course, they won't win the chancellery, but if you look at the SPD in the polls, they're not so much stronger than the Greens. So in a way, it's very ambitious to have a Kanzlerkandidat, but they haven't decided whether they will call him that or not. But I don't see any other politician in the Green Party who would now seriously challenge him, because he's, at least when it comes to public speaking, and people are familiar with his name, his popularity. There's no one who can even come close.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly has the visibility, right? Yes. Switching subjects a little bit, one of our viewers is curious if you can share something about the reaction in Germany to the announcement made by Washington and Berlin to deploy long-range US missiles in Germany from 2026 on. This would be the first time since the Cold War that this would happen. And from what I've observed, certainly there have been some mixed reactions. The German defense minister, Boris Pistorius, and some leading Christian Democrats have been very positive about this. Others, including those in the coalition, have been disappointed about this decision and very concerned about this decision. Can you talk to us a little bit about how people are responding to this announcement?
From what I think it's another example of I think a great skepticism, especially on the political left, towards not just stationing long-range missiles in Germany, but of American involvement in European politics in general. You have a very strong sentiment like that in the Social Democratic Party. You've always had it. Mr. Mützenich, the head of the Social Democrats in the National Parliament, he's always been also one of the people most skeptical of advancing military aid to Ukraine. And in the SPD, that you've always had, the Friends of Russia. They've been very silent in recent years, of course, but the old network still exists, and the old anti-American sentiment is still there. You see it very bluntly from Mrs. Wagenknecht, who's been extremely critical of this plan. She's anti-NATO, like I said. She said NATO, is an alliance whose leading nation has ambushed, half a dozen countries in recent years against international law. So for many on the left, the US is sort of the main villain in international politics, and this is just one other opportunity to remind the public of that view. But from what I've heard, this is in the Green Party. I think there are many reasonable people who see this as a betterment of German security. In the Christian Democratic Union, I think they all applaud this plan. And like I said, the SPD is more or less divided. You have some people who are also reasonable there. So I would. It's like you said. It's a divisive issue. I couldn't, at the top of my head, say there is a majority for or against it.
So we'll certainly have to see how it plays out. And obviously, when talking about this topic, we're back in a sense at our opening topic of what happens in the U.S. and who the next U.S. president will be, because undoubtedly that will impact this decision, but also the perception of this decision in Germany moving forward. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Perhaps as we come to a close, there is a important round birthday later this week. The Altkanzlerin Angela Merkel will have her 70th birthday on Wednesday, and as a longtime observer of German politics, I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on how history might look at the chancellor and consider her 16 years in office.
Now, I have a personal view on her time as chancellor, and then maybe the historical view in general will differ from that. But from many people of the senior leadership from her party that I speak with these days, and I'm currently writing a piece for Wednesday, for her 70th birthday, the majority of people are happy that she's gone, and she shows very little interest in the party. There've been attempts to offer her all sorts of posts, and she denied all of them. So it's not just a rejection coming from one side, from the Merz camp, but she's also rejected a lot that was offered to her. Many olive branches, at least she has allowed the party to have a festive act for her in September for her birthday, with some 200 guests or so. But I would say she has managed some things well, like the financial crisis. She held the euro together more or less. She's always been popular abroad. She's always been seen as a great stateswoman in other countries. I think she's quite popular in the US. She received all sorts of awards and diplomas. I remember the speech she gave in Harvard, which I think was very effective for that audience. Her behind the Iron Curtaining, and dreaming about freedom. In Germany, many who are not on the political left see her very critically. They say she made the migration crisis possible, and she had one good act, that was the Turkey deal that she made with Erdogan, that created a temporary decrease in numbers, but she never really managed the crisis at its root. She paved the way for leaving nuclear power behind, which is now in the long term resulted in soaring energy prices, and really which pose a grave danger to Germany as a country of industries, heavy industries. She did away with the draft. Now everyone's talking about bringing it back because the military is in a dire state. She was always driven by polls. Even her friends would agree to that. She always looked at the what the public wanted at any given time, and I think that doesn't make for a great statescraft. Once you're elected to office, really you have the power to then for your 4 years you are in office to do what you promised to do, and not always look at where the wind is coming from and change your policies. And I think that's what she did in many crucial issues. So I don't think a history book that I would write for wouldn't have a kind eye on what she'd done in German politics. And we always had, other than countries like Italy or France and many others, we always had a very stable political system, where we had a reasonable majority party on the left, the Social Democrats. We had the Christian Union, and basically they took turns in running the country with one minor partner. And then once she left politics, it was all anarchy, more or less. That's a bit of a exaggeration, but I don't think the AfD would be nearly as popular as they are, and destructive in many ways to the political system than had she not been in office.
Interesting. Why do you think that's the case?
because she like I said, because these numerous crises she never dealt with. When she established the phrase, wir schaffen das, and we have a Willkommenskultur, that was really how you speak at a evangelischen Kirchentag. I don't know the English phrase for that, but it's not. She really didn't see the limits of what a country like Germany can integrate sensibly, without destabilizing it. So I think maybe to end on a more positive note, maybe she would have been a good foreign minister. She's famous for her stamina in late night sessions, and she was really admirable in talking eye to eye with leaders of state all around the world. She had great relationships with many. I think Barack Obama and her got along very, very well, which is important, which is a talent that you either have or not in politics. So yes, maybe that she just had the wrong office.
So one thing that I've heard sort of on and off again in Germany is a discussion about term limits for the chancellor. Do you think that as people reflect on Angela Merkel's tenure in office, this is something that might come back, sort of a conversation about just limiting it to 2 terms, as is the case in other countries as well?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. I would think there are more crucial reforms, like limiting the number of members of parliament. Which, I mean, we have the largest parliament in the Western world. We have our bureaucracy is grown out of proportion. So first deal with these issues, and like I said, have respect for the sovereign, and if someone holds office and is reelected again, then obviously the sovereign is happy with the way they run their office. So I haven't really made up my mind about that.
Yeah, fair enough. So let me close with a question that I just received from one of our viewers about a completely different topic. Our viewer is curious about your views on how Germany is looking at China. He writes, Germany seems to be waffling on China's current aggressive trading actions that impact Germany's industries, particularly the auto industry. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts on where Berlin is, where Germany is vis-a-vis China.
I think this government has a more robust approach towards China. We've just had the decision by the Interior Minister to not allow Huawei in the national networks. But it's tricky, of course. It's the most important trade partner by numbers. And I think this phrase, how do you say, to de-risk, not to move away too quickly, but to if you're heavily dependent, say as a German car maker, on China, on this one market, maybe try to spread that risk a little further. I think that would be wise. And from what I mean, when Mr. Habeck just visited, there were at the very last minute some meetings were cancelled with him. So I think the Chinese side especially the Green Party here, has a much tougher stance on China than, say, Angela Merkel would have had. Yeah.
I mean, and that's something that we've seen through the national security policy that was introduced and the China policy that was introduced. There certainly seems to be a stronger stance vis-a-vis China from the government. But of course, as you say, it's complicated because of all of the business ties and business connections. Did you want to add something?
No, I think, you won't get a lot of applause for this course from the business community. I mean, right. from German industry, but right. That's understandable.
Well, Felix, herzlichen Dank. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Kaffeepause. We'd be delighted to to have a conversation again with you in a few months, and again, measure the pulse of what's going on in Germany, particularly with the elections coming up in the three Eastern German Länder. Our eyes will be focused on Germany and German politics. So many thanks again for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a privilege.